So Chavez Jr. quits after 5 rounds against Danny Jacobs. The crowd were very unhappy. They were throwing things into the ring after the fight. I'm sure many of the viewers on DAZN were also unhappy. And to some extent, Eddie Hearn was probably unhappy as well. But I've got absolutely no sympathy for any of them. Because if you don't know what to expect from Chavez Jr. by now, then you're a damn fool. Chavez Jr., that name has become synonymous with a lack of professionalism, to say the least. I mean, this is a guy who routinely misses weight for fights. This is a guy who has been charged with a DUI during training camp before. Think about that, people. Who the hell catches a DUI charge during training camp? Well, Chavez Jr., that's who. He's been fined a hell of a lot of money many times for missing weight. And I believe he was also fined for the marijuana, catching a marijuana charge one time. So, complete lack of professionalism. That's what Chavez Jr. is all about. And of course, he's quitting a fight before against Andre Fonfara. To be fair, against Fonfara, he'd taken a much worse beating than he'd taken here against Danny Jacobs. But when you combine the fact that he's this spoiled rich kid, a lack of professionalism, he's quit before, he's been very inactive. I mean, what did you expect, people? It's incredible to me. I know Mexicans support their fighters, but it's incredible to me that this guy still draws crowds. You know? The Mexican people still get behind this guy and cheer him on. Obviously, his dad was a legend in Mexico, but Chavez Jr. has disappointed so many times. You would have imagined that the vast majority of Mexican fans would have learned their lesson by now when it comes to this guy. But apparently not. Perhaps this will be the final straw that will make Mexican fans turn their back on Chavez Jr. for good. A lot of people are saying it's the end for him. We'll see. I would not be surprised personally if he comes back sometime in the future and still manages to draw a crowd. Now, as far as the fight itself, Chavez Jr. had a size advantage because, as I say, he missed weight. And Danny Jacobs is probably going to be a pretty decent sized super middleweight. But even he was dwarfed next to Chavez Jr., who looked massive in there, looked like a cruiserweight, literally. And Chavez Jr. was actually having some success. He was imposing his size on Danny Jacobs. He was pushing him, leaning on him, and getting some nice shots off, truth be told. Jacobs, as the fight progressed, started having more success, started timing Chavez Jr., I think getting used to the size and strength of him. Towards the end of the 4th round, he started landing some significant punches. And in the 5th round, the success continued for Danny Jacobs. And that prompted Chavez Jr. to quit. He was complaining about elbows and headbutts and all this other kind of stuff. But look, this is boxing. It's a rough sport. And yes, there are rules. But at the same time, you have to understand that you're going to get the occasional forearm in your face. You're going to get the occasional opponent who will be a little reckless with their head. That will happen. And you have to fight through that. You know, you can't be a crybaby about it just because things are getting a little bit rough. And let's be real, that's not the reason that he quit. At least not the main reason. The main reason he quit is because Danny Jacobs was starting to do more damage with his fists. That's why Chavez Jr. quit. So it is what it is. That's what you normally get from Chavez. He was doing quite well, but he lost heart and then he decided he wanted out of there. And for Danny Jacobs, to be honest with you, I think this was a good move because although he was robbed of having a conclusive victory, Chavez Jr., for better or for worse, attracts attention. And Danny Jacobs, you know, his first fight at 168, he benefited from the fact that Chavez Jr. attracts attention by beating him and by the little, I don't want to call it a mini riot, but, you know, the discontent in the crowd throwing stuff into the ring after the fight. People will remember it for the wrong reasons, but at least they'll remember it. At least they'll keep Danny Jacobs' name in their minds. So I think it's mission accomplished for Danny Jacobs. the crowd lost out. Chavez Jr. lost out because he lost the fight and he lost, I think, $1 million that he was fined for missing weight. Some of the DAZN viewers missed out. Eddie Hearn, I mean, did he miss out? Maybe a little bit because the fans are probably not going to be happy with the promoter. But Danny Jacobs didn't miss out. Danny Jacobs, other than securing a decisive victory, he got extra money. Well, actually, let me not say he got extra money because I'm not sure whether the $1 million that Chavez Jr. was fined went to Danny Jacobs or not. Maybe it did. I'm sure. Yeah. In fact, Jacobs must have been compensated to some extent for getting in the ring with a guy who was so far overweight. So yeah, it was a win-win for Jacobs. He was part of a memorable event, albeit for the wrong reasons. Made some extra money and got a win in his super middleweight debut. So he'll be happy. And it's going to be interesting to see how Danny Jacobs does actually against some of the top guys at 168 because Callum Smith is looking vulnerable. You got Billy Joe Saunders, who is a good slick boxer, but not the biggest 168 pounder out there, is he? Danny Jacobs obviously moving up from middleweight himself, but looks a far bigger fighter than Billy Joe Saunders. Then you've got the likes of Caleb Plant, and who's the other super middleweight champion I'm forgetting now? So you've got Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant. God, the super middleweight division is just not as hot as it used to be because I can't think who the final champion is. It's not Darrell, is it? Surely it's not Darrell. Was the Darrell Yildirim fight for one of the belts? Maybe it was. Was that the WBC belt? You guys fill me in the comment section below. I really haven't been paying attention to the PBC super middleweights of late. So anyway, it's going to be interesting to see Danny Jacobs in the mix with those guys. Obviously, it's going to be easier for Danny Jacobs to fight Billy Joe Saunders or Callum Smith because they're both matchroom fighters, as is Danny Jacobs. But maybe for the right money, they could entice one of the PBC guys, if Al Heyman will allow them, one of the PBC guys over to the zone for a one-fight deal against Danny Jacobs. You know, because even though Danny Jacobs doesn't have a title, he would probably be the A-side against any of the PBC super middleweights, right? He's a much bigger name than a Caleb Plant or a Darrell or any of them guys there. He's held in higher regard than those guys, rightly or wrongly. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Your thoughts on the Chavez Jr. fight. Were you disappointed or were you like me, just kind of shrugging your shoulders and laughing like, what did you expect? And who would you like to see Danny Jacobs in with next? How well do you think he can do? 168 pounds, who do you think he could beat? And who do you think his management should avoid? Not that I'm advocating fighters avoiding people, but if you were in the shoes of his management, who would you see as the biggest threat to Danny Jacobs at 168? Let me know in the comment section below, people. It's happening. I'm out.